candle had already burned halfway down before she touched a match to it. 4 in the morning, and the house above her slept in its silence and its warmth, while she knelt on cold flagstones with her hands already raw from the ash she was raking out. One wrong movement, one dropped coal, one late fire in the master's dressing room, and everything that followed that day would go wrong. She did not know yet how wrong. She only knew that the fires had to be lit before anyone woke, that the water had to be hot before anyone rang, and that if she was seen, if she was heard, she had failed at the one thing her position required most, to be invisible. This was not unusual. This was Tuesday. This was every day. By the time the family above her stirred, she would already have laid and lit as many as a dozen fires, scrubbed the front steps on her knees so the stone was pale before the street woke, blackened the kitchen range, and carried up cans of hot water so heavy her arms ached by breakfast. And she was young, perhaps 13, perhaps 15, because in 1888, in a very great number of British households, this was a job given to girls barely past childhood, in a trade that employed more women than any other in the country. There is a question worth sitting with before we go any further. Why would anyone choose this life? And the honest answer is that, for most of these girls and boys, it was not really a choice in the way we might imagine choice. It was survival. Domestic service was, by 1888, the single largest category of employment for women in Britain, larger than textile work, larger than any factory trade. For a girl from a poor family in the countryside or the slums of a growing city, there were very few respectable alternatives. Factory work was harder to find and paid little better. The workhouse was the true alternative, and everyone understood what that meant. Service offered a roof, food, and a wage, however small. And crucially, it offered something the workhouse could not, the appearance of respectability. But here is the part that will matter later, and I want you to hold on to it. Everything about that respectability depended on a single piece of paper that the servant herself did not control. We will come back to that. For now, back to the house and the fire and the hours before dawn. If you had walked into a great townhouse in Belgravia or a country estate in Yorkshire that morning, you would have found a world organized with almost military precision, a hierarchy so exact that a servant's place within it dictated not just their duties, but where they slept, what they ate, who they were permitted to speak to, and how they addressed everyone else in the house, including each other. At the top of this world, below the family itself, stood the butler and the housekeeper, who ran the household's two separate empires, his covering the male staff, wine, silver, and the front of house, hers covering the female staff, linen, stores, and much of the domestic economy. Below them came the cook, who in a large house held remarkable authority over her own kitchen, sometimes earning more than a governess and answering to almost no one but the mistress herself. Then came the lady's maid and the valet, who tended to the personal needs of their employers and often traveled with them, occupying a strange middle position. Servants, certainly, but ones who might know their employer's secrets more intimately than any friend. Below these were the footmen, chosen in the wealthiest households as much for their height and appearance as their competence, dressed in livery, tasked with waiting at table, answering the door, and being seen, because a matched pair of tall footmen was, in its own way, a kind of household decoration, a display of the family's means. Then the housemaids who did the relentless daily cleaning, the kitchen maids and scullery maids who did the dirtiest and least glamorous work in the house, and at the very bottom, the hall boys and the between maids, sometimes called tweenies, who worked wherever they were needed and who occupied the lowest rung of a world already built on rank. It is important to say plainly that not every servant lived this exact life. A great aristocratic house in London might employ 20 or 30 indoor servants. A modest suburban household, the kind that made up the vast majority of employers in Victorian Britain, might employ just one. This single servant was known, with a phrase that tells you everything about her position, as the maid of all work. She had no hierarchy to hide behind, no cook to share the burden, no housemaid to divide the labor with. She did everything: the fires, the cleaning, the cooking, the laundry, the fetching, the serving, and she did it largely alone, for the lowest wages in domestic service, in households that could least afford proper facilities to make the work easier. In many ways, her life was harder than that of a housemaid in a grand estate, even though her employer might be no wealthier than a shopkeeper. This is a distinction that later Victorian writers on domestic service returned to again and again, that the popular image of the servant belonged to the great house, but the lived reality for most servants belonged to the small one. By 6 or 7 in the morning, in either kind of household, the day's work was already well underway, and it would not meaningfully stop until 10 or 11 at night. A housemaid's day might include laying fires, cleaning grates, sweeping and dusting every room in strict order before the family woke, cleaning boots and shoes, answering bells, making beds, emptying and cleaning chamber pots, carrying water up and down stairs that had not yet been fitted with plumbing in many homes, polishing brass and silver, cleaning windows, beating carpets, doing needlework in whatever moments remained, and helping to serve and clear meals. The work was not simply long, it was heavy. Coal scuttles, water cans, mattresses, furniture, carried by girls whose diet in poorer households did not always match the physical demands placed on them. And here is where that fire from the beginning becomes important again, because the entire rhythm of the day was governed by the bell. In houses with servants, an elaborate system of bells connected every room to the servants' area below or above stairs, each bell on its own distinct chime so that a servant, without seeing who rang, would know instantly which room demanded them. The bell did not ask, it did not explain. It summoned, and the summons was to be answered immediately, whatever the servant had been doing. A housemaid halfway through blacking a grate, her hands filthy, might have to drop everything and appear presentably before her employer within moments, because a slow response could be read as insolence, and insolence could end in dismissal. This brings us to something the viewer deserves to understand clearly. Servants in 1888 were not simply badly paid employees. They were in a very real sense under near total authority for as long as they remained in a household. Their time was not their own. Their movements were restricted. In many households, servants required permission to leave the house even briefly, and followers, meaning young men or women courting a servant, were either forbidden outright or heavily restricted, precisely because employers feared distraction, pregnancy, or the loss of a servant to marriage. A housemaid discovered to have a sweetheart calling at the house could be dismissed on the spot, with no obligation on the employer's part beyond the wages already owed. There was in most households one half-day off a week, and perhaps every other Sunday for church and a few hours liberty. That was, for many servants, the entire scope of their personal time. Now, what happened when a servant made a genuine mistake? This is worth pausing on, because it is where the human reality of the job becomes sharpest. A broken piece of china, a stain left on linen, a fire allowed to go out in the drawing room before guests arrived. These were not abstract inconveniences. They were often deducted from wages already meager, or they were the deciding factor in a dismissal. And dismissal, in Victorian domestic service, was not simply the loss of a job. It threatened something far larger. Here is the unresolved question I promised you earlier, the one worth carrying through the rest of this story. Everything about a servant's future, their next position, their wages, their entire respectability, depended on a character, the written reference an employer provided when a servant left. Without a good character, a servant could find it almost impossible to secure another position at all. And because there was no legal requirement for an employer to give a fair or even accurate character, the entire system rested on the goodwill or the grudge of whoever they had just worked for. A servant dismissed unfairly, accused wrongly of theft, or let go simply because an employer's mood had turned against them, had very little recourse. We will return to exactly how devastating this could become, because it is the detail that, more than any other, reveals how little actual control a Victorian servant held over their own life, however hard they worked and however well they behaved. For now, let the story continue, because the day is not over, and neither is the hierarchy of who suffered what. If the housemaid's world was defined by the bell, the kitchen maid's and scullery maid's world was defined by heat, water, and the relentless demands of feeding a household. In a large kitchen, the cook ruled absolutely, and beneath her the kitchen maid prepared, chopped, plucked, and assisted through hours of heavy, hot, repetitive labor, while the scullery maid, often the youngest and lowest paid girl in the entire household, scoured pots blackened by coal-fired ranges, scrubbed floors slick with grease and water, and handled some of the filthiest tasks in the house. Burns were common, so were cuts. So was the simple exhaustion of standing for 16 or 17 hours at a stretch in a kitchen that, in summer, could become almost unbearably hot from the constant range fire needed for cooking. Illness in this world was a genuine crisis, and not merely a personal one. A servant who fell sick in a smaller household, without other staff to cover for them, could find their position at risk simply because the work still needed doing, whether or not they were well enough to do it. In wealthier households, a servant might be nursed by the housekeeper or sent to recover, but in poorer households, and remember, most Victorian servants worked in modest homes, not great estates, a prolonged illness could mean dismissal, because an employer with one servant could not simply do without her. There was no sick pay to speak of, no guarantee of a position held open, and for a servant with no family able to take her in, illness without income could become the first step toward real destitution. By the time evening came, the pace did not truly ease. Dinner in a household with servants was itself a production. Footmen and parlor maids waiting at table, the kitchen working at full pressure to serve courses correctly timed, plates cleared and washed, silver polished afterward, fires banked for the night, and the family's evening needs attended to right up until they retired. Only then, often past 10 o'clock, could servants finally see to their own needs. A late, plain supper, some mending, perhaps a little rest before the fires had to be laid again before dawn. And where did they sleep after all this? Usually in the attic, in rooms that were unheated regardless of season, sometimes shared among 2 or 3 girls to a bed in the more crowded households, sparse in furnishing, cold in winter and stifling in summer, tucked under the roof where the family's comfort did not extend. Footmen and male staff were often housed separately, sometimes in the basement near the pantry they were responsible for guarding, since silver theft was a genuine and constant employer anxiety. Privacy, in the modern sense, barely existed. A servant's box of belongings might be searched. Her letters might be read. Her time, quite literally, belonged to someone else for as long as she remained under that roof. If you are watching this and thinking that surely conditions varied wildly between households, you are right, and it is worth saying plainly. Some employers were genuinely decent, provided reasonable food, allowed proper time off, and treated long-serving staff almost as extended family, with cooks and butlers sometimes remaining in a single household for 20, 30, even 40 years, trusted completely and treated with real respect in their later years of service. Others were petty, controlling, or outright cruel, docking wages for invented faults, working staff to exhaustion, or dismissing servants over minor infractions with no consideration for what that dismissal would cost them. Both realities existed side by side in 1888, sometimes within households on the very same street. There is another distinction worth making clear. Servants themselves were not without any agency at all. Skilled servants, a good cook, an experienced butler, a capable lady's maid, held real value in the labor market and could, in better circumstances, move between positions to improve their wages and conditions, much like any skilled worker seeking better employment. Registry offices in the growing cities helped match servants to households and word of mouth among servants themselves, passed at church, at markets, between household staff who knew each other, carried real information about which houses were fair and which were not. In rural areas, hiring fairs, sometimes called mop fairs, brought servants and prospective employers together once or twice a year, a practice with roots stretching back long before the Victorian era, but still very much alive in 1888 in many English counties. But this mobility only worked if a servant left in good standing. And this is where we finally return to the open question from earlier. The character, the reference, the single document that could make or unmake a servant's entire future. Imagine, for a moment, a servant accused of theft she did not commit. Perhaps a genuine misunderstanding, perhaps simple spite from another member of staff, perhaps an employer's mood soured by something entirely unrelated. She could be dismissed on the spot, her wages for the current period withheld or reduced, and crucially, denied a good character on her way out. Without that character, she could not easily find another position in service, and without service, in a world where so few respectable options existed for a working-class girl, her path forward narrowed dramatically. This was not a rare abstraction. It was a real and constant possibility hanging over the working life of nearly every servant in Britain, and it is the clearest evidence of just how little structural protection existed for people whose labor quite literally kept upper and middle-class Victorian life running. This, more than the physical exhaustion, more than the cold attic rooms, more than the endless bells, is what defined the servant's condition in 1888. Not simply hard work, but a complete dependency on the goodwill of people who held total power over their future, with almost no institutional check on how that power was used. If you have found this story compelling so far, this is the kind of forgotten history the fallen age exists to uncover. The real documented lives behind the polished image of the era. And if that interests you, consider subscribing so you don't miss what we uncover next. And yet the story does not end in despair, because it did not end there for most servants either. Many worked their way up through the hierarchy over years. A scullery maid becoming a kitchen maid becoming a cook, a housemaid becoming eventually a housekeeper with real authority of her own. Some left service through marriage, sometimes to a fellow servant, sometimes to someone outside the household entirely, and moved into their own homes with a trade learned firsthand in domestic management. Some emigrated, taking their skills to households in the colonies or in America, where domestic service, while still hard, could sometimes offer somewhat different conditions and wages. And some simply endured, year after year, in households that, whatever their flaws, provided stability that the alternative, the workhouse or the uncertain casual labor available to unskilled women, could not. It's worth pausing here to reopen a smaller thread from earlier, the fire and the girl kneeling before dawn. We never learned and cannot know whether her particular morning ended well or badly, because she was not a single documented person, but a composite of the ordinary, undocumented reality lived by hundreds of thousands of girls exactly like her across Britain in 1888. That is, in its own way, the deeper truth this story has been building toward. History remembers the great houses, the parties, the politics, the inventions of the age. It remembers far less often the individual servant whose name was rarely recorded anywhere except a household ledger listing her wages, and whose entire working life could hinge on the mood of an employer she was never permitted to question. If this kind of forgotten history interests you, tell us in the comments which part of Victorian daily life you'd like us to uncover next. By the time night finally came, and the last fire was banked and the last dish was dried and put away, the household above would be settling into a warmth and comfort that had been built hour by hands that would be raw and aching again before the sun rose. The bell would ring at dawn as it always did. The fires would need lighting as they always did. And the girl, or the boy, whoever they were in whichever house you choose to imagine, would rise in the cold dark once more, because that was what the position required, and there was very rarely any other choice available to them. That, more than any single dramatic incident, is the real story of what it meant to survive a day, and then another, and then another, as a Victorian servant in 1888. Not one moment of crisis, but an entire structure of life built on labor without rest, presence without power, and a future that could be decided at any moment by someone else's word.
Mind the sauce! Don't let it catch!
Yes, Mrs. Brown.
And the meat for the stew, bring it here. Quickly now, we haven't got all day. Get up. There's work to be done.
I can't, ma'am. I'm ill.
Illness is no excuse for idleness.
Please, I feel so weak.
Rest if you must, but be quick about it.
Yes, ma'am.
Your references are impressive. How long have you been in service? Over 15 years, madam. I started as a kitchen maid and rose to head cook. And your experience with formal dinners? Extensive. I can manage a full menu from soups to desserts with precision. Very good. We shall discuss terms.